Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Grabo. I'm the Associate Planner with Sacramento County and the Project Manager for this really exciting project. I'd like to thank each of you for taking the time to be with us tonight, and for some of you that took all the nights this week to be with us. I really appreciate the participation and the public involvement we've received. On behalf of Sacramento County and our consultant team of Tool Design and Opticos, we are so pleased with the conversations that we've had this week and really look forward to connecting with you more in the future. Please remember that this is just the beginning of the project, and thank you again for attending, and we look forward to see what happens next, but I'll pass that back to Cindy. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Christy. We will echo what she said. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation over the last week. A lot of familiar faces here in the room. And so some of what you'll see tonight will be a little bit of information that you've seen already, but I feel it's really important we have some new faces so that we make sure we go over and we have a shared understanding of the project and where we're headed. And I will tell you right now, you're seeing the beginning of the presentation, and we like to say in this Charrette process, the ink is still drying on some of our drawings. And so what I'm going to see in the next set of slides is somewhat of a reveal for myself as well. So again, we've been working together as a design team of about 7 designers from different home offices, and we've put it together. We've been coordinating throughout the week, but bear with us, and hopefully it'll be a little bit of fun roller coaster ride with y'all as we show you some of the design ideas. Quickly, just some virtual housekeeping. A lot of you know this already around Zoom. We will be using, you should be muted upon entry, and want to just call out a couple of things. You're free to chat to us in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that. You can see the other names of participants, and this is where you can raise your hand if you have a question. We'd like to go through a presentation of some additional ideas around design moves that we're considering within the area, and then we'll go to a question and answer format toward the end. I did see though that I believe it's Jean, you're on the phone and you raised your hand.
Yeah, it was just, all of you have done a great job in describing these things, the pictures, and I would just like to ask if you could do that again tonight, as you've been doing throughout the week. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jean. Yeah, good reminder that there are some folks on the phone and they're not necessarily watching what's on the screen. So we'll do our best to be as descriptive as you can of what's on our screen.
Hey, Cindy.
Yeah.
Hate to interrupt, but we're seeing the presenter mode. It's not at the full.
Oh, you are? Funny. I thought you were seeing the opposite. Okay.
Oh, no.
What do you see, sorry, on the screen?
I'm seeing the full slide now. Sorry, earlier it was a presenter mode. So
wonderful. Thank you very much for that correction, Matali. All right, and this call is being recorded as we mentioned before. So quickly, a project overview. Re-Envision West Arden Arcade is a 16-month planning process funded through the Caltrans Sustainable Communities Grant Program. The county applied for and received funds that are funding this project, our visioning work, and we're really looking to create an actionable plan specifically around creating comfortable and connected public realm for all users, balancing multimodal operations and thinking about safety, economic opportunities, and equity through transportation options. To ground everyone in the project location, this is the project study area. From the west, the boundary is Howe, and on the east, it's Watt Avenue, with the exception of a little bump out onto the east of the intersection of Arden Way and Watt, to include the middle school and the development to the north of that. On the north, the project study area is bounded by Cottage Way, and to the south, it's Northrop Avenue. So that's generally where we're looking at in the project study area. This is our project schedule. As a reminder, we're in the summer 2020. We are here during the Discovery Charrette on day 4, and we'll continue to have ongoing community engagement over the next few months. We have an online survey. We'd love for you to participate in that. And we will continue to meet with other stakeholders throughout the area. And we'll have another design charrette where we'll advance. What you're going to see tonight is a lot of starter ideas. We like to call them starter ideas. Again, it's not set in stone at all. It's about ideas that we generate based on the conversation we've heard. And we'll come back in October and have the second part of the Charrette. Our public sessions are just a schedule of what we've done this week. We are on Thursday, August 6th. We've had a number of public presentations throughout the week. A lot of you have been a part of that, so thank you so much for such great participation. And we want to call out the attention to the project website here at the bottom as a reminder. It's sort of your one-stop shop for all information for the project, and we'll have additional information moving forward. And again, what we've seen in the corridor, as you know, we've gone through virtual tour in different areas and have been out on the corridor. And I won't dwell too much on this. A lot of you have seen these slides before, but just a reminder that a lot of it's very easy to navigate this area by a car. There's a lot of space allocated in our streets to the motor vehicle. And there's less so for pedestrians or people who use the sidewalks and those who bike. We've seen a lot of barriers to navigating the area comfortably, lack of sidewalks, things in the sidewalks when they're present, and some areas where it says really don't walk here by creating discontinuous sidewalks or a don't walk here sign. But what we see is a lot of folks wanting to navigate the area, people biking through the area. They're not sure if they should be on the sidewalk or in the street. People navigating across the busy streets, especially when there's 7 lanes in each direction. It's hard to get across from side to side during the time that's allowed for to get through the crossing. We have a lot of people using mobility devices, be they personal mobility devices or trying to cane through the area. This is another example of someone doing that through an intersection, trying to find their way with a vision impairment. And that's a real challenge on some of our large streets here. Want to mention who we've met with this week. It's been a fantastic week of conversation. Again, we've had 4 public meetings and we've had a number of stakeholder interviews or listening sessions throughout the week with the Community Advisory Committee for this project, economic development and homeowners associations. The DOT has been part of this conversation, park and recreation districts, different folks who represent accessibility organizations, school representatives, and commerce and interested residents, community services, and the Sac Metro Air District. So a lot of folks have been involved, so thank you for being here. And in terms of community values, we've heard the importance of celebrating the diversity, of creating a healthy and livable community, the importance of aging in place and making it family friendly. We've heard, the important things to preserve are that it's people scaled, that it doesn't feel like a real big city, but that it's scaled to the human scale. It's family focused, and there's a lot of local businesses to celebrate. The different types of food and people and culture. The parks are great amenities throughout your area, and enhancing that through additional ideas around trees and landscaping. A lot of what needs to change, we heard the importance of revitalization for some of the corridors, lack of neighborhood identity, a lot of asphalt, a lot of space dedicated to the motor vehicle, but maybe not enough green space through the area. Storefronts are sometimes difficult to access. There's big parking lots in front of them. And lacking infrastructure for pedestrians and also for bicyclists as well. And what we've heard could be created is sort of that sense of comfort and security while walking, housing diversity, vibrant neighborhoods, more green space, comfortable and connected sidewalks and bikeways, access to fresh food and affordability, and really an identity. We heard this loud and clear about an identity for the community. So we're still in this process of what could be. And we will show you some of our ideas. I'm going to pass it off to Ian here to talk about a little bit of when we've created some of these starter ideas. There's some design principles that we have in mind, and we want to tee up the conversation that we'll have with you with some of those ideas first. So, Ian, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll run the presentation from my screen. If you're speaking, great.
Unmute, yeah.
Hello.
Thanks, Cindy. So the next 4 slides, what you're going to see is a no place on the left side and then a place on the right. And you'll see in all 4 slides, there's no identity. There's a fast, hot road through an underserved community that's very car focused to the detriment of the community. In each time, I want you to notice the trees, the shade, and the human scape.
Hello?
Hello? Oh, hello.
Hi.
I'm a citizen and I joined your meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. We are in the middle of the presentation, so we'll have an opportunity to have conversation with folks who are on the phone and joining by computer. So we'll ask that you, if you can, mute yourself for now, and we'll have a good conversation toward the end after the presentation of some of our initial starter ideas. Thanks for being here.
Okay, I see these pictures. Where are these pictures from? This is not my neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah, maybe I can go into that. We're going to just show you some principles and examples just to kind of bracket the ideas. That they just happen to be really good examples of before and afters. We don't have any afters from your community, so we're showing sort of precedences from other hot, underserved places.
Oh, yeah,
So,
this is not my neighborhood.
Thank
you mute your phone,
Okay,
please?
I'll comment at the end.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So
Okay.
where are we now? So that hot trail never got used, and now it gets used because it has trees on it. This hot fast street had well, has 2 elementary schools on it, and we narrowed it and put in a tree canopy and shared use paths on both sides. The kids now can walk and ride to school comfortably. Before they used to be chauffeured by their parents. And the last example is on a waterfront. And nobody used the waterfront because it was just so hot and they had that kind of rural highway going down the edge. And we replaced it with a very friendly city street with a nice wide shared use path and street trees and shade. And so now it's a very vibrant waterfront. So for the last little while, we've been meeting with people and we've heard from probably hundreds of people when you add them all together. And we're starting to see patterns. If you go to the next slide, we hear the same sorts of concerns and issues, and we call that, it sort of triangulates toward a vision, towards a kind of a consensus of what the place ought to be like in the future. And so these are all like starter ideas based on what we've heard so far and in need of refinement, but this is what we're coming up with out of the box. Walkability was on top of a lot of people's minds. And when we go to a place and if there aren't a lot of pedestrians, there's not a lot of vibrancy, or if the pedestrians are out there aren't being treated very well, it's probably a land use problem or a transportation problem or both. And so maybe the place isn't connected. Maybe there's no nodes for people to walk to. Maybe it's not comfortable or safe. So these are the sorts of things that we look for to help us inform the designs for the area. And I'd like to focus on the comfort, accessibility, safety, and equity part. And we'll start with safety. There's something what we call statistical safety, and that's the total number of crashes, deaths, and injuries. And of course, we want to use best practices to reduce that. But what's really important too is what we call perceived safety or comfort. And this is how people make decisions. Are parents comfortable letting their kids walk to school? Are employees comfortable riding their bikes to work? Are customers comfortable going shopping on their bike or by foot or by transit? So it's comfort is how people make decisions. And ideally, we'd have safe and comfortable streets. Now, there's another type of safety, which we call legal safety. And that has to do with the rules, the laws, the guidelines, and past practices. And fortunately, the federal government, the governor's office, the state, the county are all interested in doing better for things like greenhouse gases, affordability, resiliency, these kinds of things. So those past practices are changing. And so now we need to move away from just doing what we used to do, which undermines the vision, and instead start working to make safe, comfortable, and legal streets. So the first thing is about safety. The streets, especially the framework streets throughout the community, are too fast. The cars are moving far too quickly for a safe and comfortable environment. If you get hit at 40 miles an hour, 90% of the time, folks will die at that speed. And the 10% who don't die will probably be injured. So the slower the speed, the safer the streets. It has to do with a couple things. One is shorter stopping distances. At slower speeds, you can stop much more quickly than you can at a high speed. And furthermore, your field of vision expands as you go slower. When you go fast, you're looking at a dot at the end of the road. So you're more likely at slower speeds to notice kids walking across or somebody pulling out of a driveway and that kind of thing, and avoid the crash. Now, the design team has looked at a whole bunch of different types of measures to help motorists slow down while simultaneously achieving the vision of the community. So we'll just blow this up just a little bit. And some of the ideas you'll see are the reduction in the number of lanes to make room for separated bike facilities and proper sidewalks and trees. You'll see street trees, you'll see some small medians, these sorts of things. And let's go to the, let's just keep going to the next slide. And this is some federal guidance. Remember I told you that the federal government's interested in this sort of thing as well. And this is in their guidelines on how to select bicycle facilities to create comfort. And so when speeds are over 30 miles an hour, or if there's over 6,000 cars a day on a street, which is pretty well on every arterial in this area, the street requires a bike lane or a shared use path. And those just simply don't exist right now in the community. And so that's what we're proposing. And the reason the federal government wants to do this is to make bicycling more appealing to the vast majority of the population. There's a small fraction of people who will ride anywhere. There's some enthusiastic people that will ride in conventional bike lanes, but most people are only comfortable riding when they have separated bike facilities. And so that's why the federal government is emphasizing that. So on the right-hand side of this image, this is a big arterial road. You'll see a shared use path with some trees. So that's a comfortable edge. On the next slide, you'll see some painted bicycle facilities, either down the center, down the edge, and they're buffered with a little 2 or 3 foot wide strip to keep them separated from the motorists. Theirs are fairly comfortable as well. But the home run is if it's completely separated with street trees and a curb and some sort of physical separation. And then kids, families, all the potential population of cyclists can use the street comfortably. So the idea is to create what we call complete streets that are comfortable for all the different user groups. It's easy to accommodate buses, trucks, cars, but it's more difficult to accommodate comfortably the vulnerable users, the pedestrians, the cyclists, and also to support the businesses, the neighborhoods, the institutions, and the recreational areas. And in particular, out of that vulnerable group, there's some very vulnerable folks, like folks who have a mobility impairment or a sight impairment, or children, or elderly folks who might walk slower when crossing the street. So these are the sorts of folks that we're really interested in accommodating. And some of the changes we'd like to make are just simple things like how to put a sidewalk across a driveway. And the diagram on the left shows the sidewalk going across at the level of the sidewalk. It doesn't dip down to street level. So it's much more comfortable for someone to cross. And any elevation change is made up in what we call the apron between the sidewalk and the street. And there's a good example of that from just a photograph on the right. And on this diagram, we see a sidewalk and there's a mid-block crossing. And how would somebody who can't see find that crossing as they're walking down the sidewalk? They could just wander right past. And so this is a tactile guide which signals to somebody who can't see that they can turn and cross the street there safely. So they would follow the guide down to the edge of the street where there would be a warning strip and then a push button in a predictable location, get the signal to get across the street. So these are the sorts of things we can do to enhance the built environment for people with various disabilities. This is a street, and if you look on the sides of this little street, there's a lot of shops and tables and sandwich boards and so on. And there's no way for somebody who can't see to find a way through. There's no curb, there's no tactical guide. So simply adding a tactical guide down the street, middle of the street, in this case a shared space, would help immensely the navigability of the space. So we have warning surfaces in the United States, but what we're suggesting to enhance things is these what we call directional indicators. Now, one of the past practices has been working when you're designing a street, work from the inside out. Make everything okay for the motorists during peak hours, 20 years in the future sort of thing. And then the leftover spaces for trees, sidewalks, bike facilities come afterwards, if they fit. And that's been the the problem in this area. They didn't fit, and so all of those populations were left out. And so what we'd like to do, and what is best practice, is to start thinking about the outside in, where you accommodate the vulnerable folks, and then work your way in, and then use the balance of the space for the least, the strong folks, the folks in the cars in the middle. So you start from the outside and you work your way in. We have an idea for a parkway on what's now the Alta Arden Expressway. And one of the cool things about parkways is the nice feeling as you go through slowly through the sort of park-like environment. And instead of doing signals, we're thinking maybe do roundabouts, which keep things moving. One of the nice things about roundabouts is they have very few conflict points, unlike signals like shown here. You look at all the different ways you can crash at a signal. And at a roundabout, there's far fewer of those. So it's no coincidence that there's about half the number of crashes in roundabouts compared to signals. And there's about 80 to 90% fewer deaths and injuries. And they're quite safe if they're well designed for cyclists and pedestrians. And here's a lady just successfully crossing the roundabout. And here I just took a couple of pictures of older cyclists successfully navigating roundabouts. Now you can ride through the roundabout, or in this case, you can ride through separated paths around the roundabout. And if you look at the next slide, you'll see the routing for the bikes. And this is what we're proposing in this corridor, so you don't have to ride in the street itself. Also, you just have to size these things, so deliveries and so forth, and fire trucks can get through, but that's routine and not difficult. The disadvantages of roundabouts, there's a couple of them. Sometimes they don't fit in the space, so we'll have to test it to make sure the roundabout fits. And then roundabouts don't work very well at really high traffic volumes, but that's not the case along the Alta Arden Expressway. But there's tons of advantages: crash reduction, emission reduction, speeding reduction, friendly to active transportation, and it's attractive. So plenty of reasons to support roundabouts. And I'd just like to end on a couple, or if there's 4 what we call design directives. We heard so much from people that this elevated itself to being a design directive. The first one, there's 4 of them. The first one is a comfortable, safe place to walk and ride a bike. And so that's super important. The second one is to create spaces for trees and shade. It's so hot that if you don't have trees and shade, people still won't walk and ride their bikes as much as they ought to. And then the next 2 are a sense of identity, sense of community. And this came through many channels to create that sense of place. And you saw at the beginning with those before and after pictures where you had that hot, barren environment to a friendly one, how the character improved. And then finally, to create a series of connections and corridors that lead to nodes of activity. So there's things to go to on foot and bike in the community. And that's very important for social cohesion. And all these things add up to a multimodal place that reduces greenhouse gases, it helps environmental justice, helps the climate, it helps with affordability, resilience, public health, advancing American with Disabilities Act, and social cohesion. There's all sorts of collateral benefits for this type of thinking. Now I'd like to pass it on to Mitali, and she's going to go over more about the nodes and corridors. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian, and hi, everyone. So I'll just be speaking briefly about what Ian introduced, which is the concept of nodes and corridors. And to take a step back, what we started doing just to get familiar with every new project area and just to understand what's really happening is to start mapping together what are the popular community destinations. So as you can see, we've mapped some of these on this map to your left. And we're also showing some examples of what we've heard are places that people like to go to. And this need not just be a utilitarian place like, say, the Target, or an important amenity like Kaiser. This also includes your local schools, your local parks, and also some places which might be slightly further away, such as the American River Parkway. So when we look at all these community destinations and we map them, then it just helps us also try and prioritize what the different corridors can be. So as you can see, we also looked at the role that the various streets within the project area can fulfill in the future. So as you can see, they're color-coded. We're thinking in terms of prosperity corridors, which is like an interesting term. And that kind of tries to capture the fact that these are the busier corridors. There's a higher intensity of uses. They're inherently more commercial, and they're basically the busier streets within the neighborhood, but there is a hierarchy. Apart from this, we also have other neighborhood streets which can function more like parkways, providing like ideal ways for people to walk and bike, a slightly calmer environment. And we can also have the other streets functioning as neighborhood level streets. Now, you'll see this image on the side of the Chicken Ranch slough. Sorry, I'll just go over that quickly, Cindy. And this is because we found that there's an interesting potential way of trying to map through the site in this interesting diagonal, because this is a feature that exists there already. This is just an idea, like, this whole thing is about starter ideas, but we can think of, other connections as well that link up parks and other spaces to other areas where people want to go. Now, after this, once we've kind of mapped out where people like to gather and where people are heading to, and also looking at the future function of streets, what emerges is like a thought, and this is just an initial idea about having nodes and corridors. So by this, what we mean is that each street, and it's not just a street right of way, it's also what's happening on either side of the street, would create a corridor, and they would be corridors of different types in the future. So, not every corridor is the same, and we want to create a sense of identity. And this can partially be done by thinking in terms of mixed use corridors and more like neighborhood serving corridors, and also greenway corridors. As you can see, there are 3 different colors indicating this on the map. And, since we don't want each and every place along a corridor to feel exactly the same, we think in terms of nodes, like, areas where important corridors intersect. So that's a place where something special can happen. That's where the intensity of uses and activities can be slightly more. And again, we can think in terms of different types of these nodes. For example, the first one are the town centers. That's like a higher intensity use and more of like a regional destination. The next slide, please, Cindy. So here you see, this is an example from the Bay Area. This is Santana Row. I'm sure many people might already be familiar with it. And I'm not saying that this is the best example potentially for West Arden Arcade, but it's an idea of what a town center can typically feel like. So what are the attributes? These are typically regional destinations, and they are inherently mixed use in character. So there's a mix of shopping and housing and other uses such as recreational and office uses. And there's a reason for that, because when you have a mix of different uses, people come to these places, people stay longer, and there's a reason to be, which makes these places inherently safer and more vibrant to be in. And this is also an opportunity to introduce certain features such as shared public spaces, shared streets, and other such design ideas that we might be exploring. But not every space needs to be that intense or that popular at a regional level. Throughout the neighborhood, we can think in terms of smaller centers, which are more local serving, so neighborhood centers. And again, on the next slide, you'll see that there are some of these common attributes. These can be much less intense in scale, but they share the same attributes. They're mixed use. They serve the local community. They can be something as simple as your corner store. They can be something like a local eatery. It can even be a venue for the local farmers market. It doesn't matter, exactly what the uses are. But the point is that these are walkable places, and they're inherently mixed use. And these are places where people would come and congregate. So now the reason why we're thinking in terms of nodes and corridors is because streets are not just the actual right-of-way design. Streets inherently include what's happening on either side of them. And that's why we like to think in terms of public realm design. So in that, even the humble sidewalk, serves a number of different functions. You have a pedestrian zone where people would be walking. You even have a zone which is right adjacent to what we call the frontage, which is a private building side, against the side of the sidewalk, where people just like to hang around. They might want to window shop. They might just want to spend some time there, but they're not getting in the way of people who are walking and going from place to place in the center of the sidewalk. And then you also have a furniture zone or a tree zone in which you can accommodate everything from street trees to lighting to even furniture and other things like that. So the reason why we want to consider all these elements is because they together create the kind of environment that we're looking for. So, it's easy to think that we want to have outdoor seating, in front of a restaurant. But unless we have the space in mind and unless we've thought through the design elements, it's not going to function well and people would not feel comfortable. So here are some of the common design elements that we're going to be considering, when we think about the urban form and the urban design elements that will guide the street design. The two go hand in hand. would be, and these are just good design principles that we'll be considering. One thing is about trying to carve out shared open spaces. Now, these in particular can be just part of the private realm. They don't need to be new public spaces that the city needs to try and discover, but through good design and through good coding standards, we can try and create privately owned but publicly accessible small spaces. And again, it's more about how these places are designed and where they're located rather than the actual size for them to be successful. Also, we have fairly large lots, and as they redevelop, they would have internal private spaces. So it'll be important to think again about how the buildings orient, like, how do they address internal areas? Are they just parking and servicing areas, or can they also serve the function of an open space, which would be publicly accessible? Similarly, it's important on the next slide to see how the buildings are oriented. We can't think of any space being vibrant and where people want to be unless you have entrances facing onto the sidewalk or onto the common shared spaces. So that's an important consideration, is building orientation. And also important is parking lots. I know we all need parking lots, and there are many uses for which they're essential, but honestly, I don't think anyone enjoys looking at a parking lot or walking next to it. So that's why there are many, many ways by which you can actually shield the parking and the servicing, so no one needs to know it's right there. But it creates a much more walkable and a more pleasant environment when you're going along the street. So again, just simple ideas to try and activate the spaces, and that takes us to the place-based street network, and I'll hand it over to Patrick, who'll be dealing with these slides.
Great, thanks, Mitali. Cindy, can you hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Patrick Gelster. So I'll be talking a little bit about the place-based street network. So really about the idea of, so how do we knit everything we heard together? So as Mitali was mentioning, we have a network of streets that we've designated either as prosperity corridors, so the major commercial corridors, the Parkway, so think of Alta and Arden, and then some of our neighborhood streets and Greenway streets. So we'll walk through some of those today. So this is an example of the prosperity street on the right, and then if you can click through, an example of the Parkway street. So really building on the different character elements of these. So providing, one of the big things we heard throughout the week was really providing green space and shade. So that was a major thing that people wanted to see, safe spaces to recreate, be outside with your family, ways to get to school, and opportunities around that. So we go to the next one. Kind of working our way down to a little bit of a smaller street, thinking of neighborhood greenways. So how do you connect really to those parks and key destinations? Parks and schools really are what this network in and of itself is meant to access. So Bell Street, Northrop, going to the American River Parkway, those are kind of how all of those would help funnel from the neighborhood to those destinations. So really what we wanted to talk about, and these are all just starter concepts, was really how to knit it all together and where to start. So one of the options that we're coming up with was kind of this term about kind of a responsive implementation strategy. So we kind of varied it out into 5 steps, and this is a street-focused plan, a street space-focused plan. We wanted to center that in this conversation. So our step 1 is really thinking about a rapid community response network. So these are the facilities from everything we've heard, the streets from everything we've heard this week that have the least amount of conflicts on them, but that access some really important key destinations and provide community-wide benefits. So they're the ones such as Hurley Way, so that gets you to the American Parkway riverfront, to the Parkway, and then also to Bell Street, close to the schools, and then close to all the way across, all the way to Watt. And so that would connect you with Morse, and then up to the north to Cottage. So this really works to avoid the major commercial corridors and helps us with the idea of getting something on the ground really soon. So a way that we can make sure this plan shows up in the community. So what I'm going to do is walk through each of these steps, and I'll show some cross sections that we'll talk a little bit about more later too, but just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So what you can see on the left is the existing Cottage Way cross-section for the street. So it has 3 lanes of traffic and on-street bike lanes. But what we've heard really this week was that even if we have on-street bike lanes in the community, they either get blocked by vehicles or by trash cans, or they just don't feel comfortable for people to be out there, especially when you think of it wanting to be out there with your family. Would I want to take my grandma out there to ride? That would be kind of how I think about it. Or would you feel comfortable with your kids? The way in which you might feel comfortable might be different depending on who you're with, and wanting to make this a family-friendly community is what we heard. So one of the ideas on the right-hand side, the starter idea here, is really about this network of these 3 streets that each have a consistent facility type. So it's really legible, it's really easy to navigate getting around the community, but also that it has kind of the striped buffer between the 2-way separated bikeway that has both a horizontal and a vertical separation from traffic. So that these would be things that could be with paint and buffers and things that could be put on the ground in the near term. So if we go to the next one, Morse is a little bit harder to see, but then we have, but we'll be able to zoom into these in a little bit. Really, this is harder to see because there are 3 various different cross sections of Morse, but in the general scheme of things, they have the same attributes as what we just looked at on Cottage Way. So we'll be able to zoom into those in a little bit. If we go to Hurley, what you can see on Hurley, so kind of at the bottom of our study area, is that we have some 4 lanes of traffic when we get towards the American River Parkway. So the idea here is then in the community where we have 2 lanes of traffic on-street bike lanes and sometimes parking, would really be to shift where the bike lanes are and put them all on one side, to put them on the north side where you would really be accessing the schools. So that would be really making this to get you to the schools, into the park, and to the Parkway. So similar setup as Cottage Way, but also leaves parking there to make sure that this gets rapidly implemented. So step 2 is really, now that we have the bright purple lines, which were the step 1 rapid network, would really be building out the community-wide network. So if you kind of think about it as you have a framework here, and then you'll build the framework like this to get all of the facilities to connect. So you'll have a circuitous route within the community and connect to the overall Arden Arcade network. So this is really looking at Bell Street, so really looking at Encina High School, and then looking at the elementary school and the upcoming middle school that will be there, and then Exposition Park, sorry, not Exposition Park,
Empowerment Park.
Empowerment Park. Sorry about that. Empowerment Park. I was close. And then, so Bell Street and Northrop Ave would be kind of smaller community scale neighborhood greenways. So really gives you the tree canopy feeling, the shade makes you want to be out there to walk and bike, and those would connect you to a larger Alta Arden Parkway. So Alta Arden itself has a lot of opportunity and is really wide, but doesn't actually have a huge amount of volume. So what we have here is, as you can see, there's a few different sections of it, and we'll go over the opportunity for the cross-section in a sec, but there are wide opportunities there, so we'll come back to that one. So for Bell Street, so some of these smaller neighborhood routes, so we currently have about 57 to 60 feet of right-of-way, 2 lanes in each direction, bike lanes. What we heard kind of resoundingly from folks at the elementary school and from the high school is that people often block the bike lanes during drop-off and pickup. So for people biking to school, it sometimes becomes unusable or uncomfortable to ride. So really wanting kind of that separated space, as you can see on the right-hand side, it would be providing parking, but then providing trees intermittently through that to keep shade space for people on both sides of the street. So it's really important to have that access on both sides to make sure it's comfortable for everyone. And so on the right-hand side, as you can see, is a two-way separated bikeway. So all of this is the same level, and that it would have shade on both sides of it. So you would be able to, if you're biking, be comfortable, and if you're walking, be comfortable. So there's a dedicated pedestrian space as well. So that way you can get to and from the schools, and with the larger volumes of people walking to school, making sure we're accommodating that on Bell. If you want to go to the next one. Northrop, so a little bit similar to Bell. Northrop is sometimes a little bit wider, but same kind of configuration. We'd actually be able to preserve parking on both sides of the street here, which is nice. So we can do trees intermittently in those parking configurations. What's a little bit different to do that is that you'd have a shared facility. So think of some of those images that Ian was showing earlier with some of those really nice trail-like facilities, and that you're building that Greenway feeling to access the Parkway. So that all of that same feeling connects to each other. And then when we narrow a little bit in some of the more narrow sections on the right-hand side, you still preserve those that same feeling, but you can provide a space for walking and biking separately. So how do we build on that? So step 3, so once you have the overall circuitous network, you have the establishing a community core. So this was our idea that Fulton becomes kind of the heart of the community, in building on a lot of the great work that the PBID, so the Property Business Improvement District, has been doing there. So it's in the northern part. And so we really like the idea of extending that feeling down through the rest of the corridor and through the neighborhood parts. So initially we would think of kind of narrowing some of the lanes. So as you can see on the left-hand side, there is the wider cross section. So in the northern side where you have the median in the middle, there's actually a built-out median as well in much of the area. But right now we have 2 lanes on either side of traffic, and then bike lanes. But what happens with the bike lanes, if you go out there, that we heard a lot about, was that because it gets so close to the gutter and the traffic, that it really feels uncomfortable, even though there is a dedicated space for cyclists. So in the northern end, initially we might not consider doing anything and kind of think of it over time, but south of Arden Way, we're really considering reallocating some space to really those people walking and biking and making it more of a pedestrian atmosphere. So really, if you dropped a pin, I liked to think about this as we were talking about it. If you dropped yourself down anywhere in the project area, where would you want to gravitate to? And often we heard that kind of Fulton was one of those places, while Howe and Arden were more kind of regional destinations. That this is an opportunity to create that community center. So you still provide landscaping, provide a fully raised separated bikeway, one on each side. So as you get a wider cross section, it's actually easier to have, if you have the space, to have one-way cycling facilities on both sides. And it actually helps work with your signal operations as well. But this provides a much wider pedestrian environment as well. So step 4 is really kind of what Vitaly was talking about, really those larger corridors, so our prosperity corridors. So really, where do we expand our economic prosperity and housing diversity? So that's really taking a look at those major corridors and parking lot opportunities along Howe and Arden Way, and then Watt Avenue, all the way on the eastern part of the corridor. So this is an idea of Watt. So Watt Avenue right now has 7 lanes of traffic in the northern section, but ironically has less traffic volume than the southern section that has a 5-lane configuration for vehicles. So we would like to continue that 5-lane cross section throughout the corridor. So that's why you only see 1 proposed on this one. But really with that wide cross section, we have the opportunity to create dedicated pedestrian sidewalks and then separated bike facilities. As I mentioned, the same kind of one-way configurations, because it's so wide, you want to make sure to maintain access where you can on both sides. And then would still provide enhanced transit opportunities. So where you see that landscaped buffer, intermittently you could create transit shelters and things like that and bend the bikeway back a little bit behind those. So lots of space and opportunities for transit improvement with this type of configuration as well. On Arden Way, there's generally a 5-lane cross-section, as you can see on the left-hand side. And in that, there are sometimes bike lanes, sometimes not, that are pretty small, and generally 5-foot wide sidewalks, sometimes blocked by utility poles or other poles. So it makes it a little bit narrower feeling, even when you're out there, than the actual 5 feet. So there are 2 different segments, kind of as we took a deeper look of possibilities that are in the realm of possibility for Arden Way. So kind of east of Fulton and west of Fulton. So west of Fulton, more between Fulton and Howe, you have a much larger volume of traffic as opposed to from Fulton to Watt. So that's why we're showing these 2 different opportunities that we can look at here. So where we need to maintain or might want to maintain the same level of traffic volume in the upper part, we can still put a dedicated bicycling and walking facility on one side, but it would be a shared use facility. So as you can see, on the northern side, you'd have a dedicated pedestrian sidewalk, and on the southern side, you would be able to fit a 2-way shared use path for folks to walk and bike. And then on the southern part, you actually have a little bit more flexibility if you're able to reallocate some of the street space. So some of these starter ideas really are able to then provide those dedicated walking and biking spaces to separate folks out. And then on our major corridor, we have Howe. So on the farthest west. So with Howe, there are 2 different cross sections. So in the northern side, there's a similar 5-foot lane or wide cross section with sidewalks. And then as you get further to the south of Alta Arden, it's a 7-lane configuration. And taking a look at the traffic volumes, we think there's an opportunity to be able to continue the same cross section for vehicles throughout the corridor. So creating a more consistent space, vehicles are weaving less. So there's actually a good consistency and a good flow with that. And similar to what we were talking about with Watt, we have an opportunity to provide the 1-way separated bikeways on both sides of the street and dedicated pedestrian spaces. So as the cross section gets narrower, we'll have some idea of that shade might not be able to fit in there, but it's not a huge part of the corridor. And then step 5, so making sure we come back and reinvest in the rapid corridors. So that's one of the biggest things I hear, is that people are afraid if you come and invest in a rapid fashion, that's it. That's the only time you're going to get investment. So we want to make sure that this plan is being responsive to that, and that we are planning to make sure that those come back. So as you can see here from Cottage Way, we had the rapid idea at the beginning, but really making sure we bring that up to the standard that the rest of the community would have. So the 2-way on shared facility on the right-hand side for build out, and sidewalks on the other. And then Morse would be a similar fashion, and also with Hurley. So you'd be able to build all of that infrastructure up to be consistent and legible throughout the neighborhood. And then I think with that, I hand it back to you, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for listening to that, and I'm excited. What we're really excited to do is, that was a really quick way of giving you a sense of some of our starter ideas. What we'd like to do is break into small group discussion here. So I want to say thank you all for the rich conversations. Hopefully you had a good conversation in your breakout room, and know that this is, again, the beginning of the process. We've heard from a number of folks who are new to the Charrette this evening, and I really appreciate the time and the effort you made to be here. And we're listening to you. There's been some great new concerns raised and elevated in this conversation, and something for us to continue to think about as we continue to refine some of the ideas around the approach to the streets and some of the development pattern that we're suggesting. So want to thank everyone for being here. I wanted to share my screen again really quickly. Hopefully you can see my screen. Everyone see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I see it.
Okay. So again, this is the overall project schedule here. Of course, it's showing the wrong one again, isn't it? There we are. And we're just at the beginning. This discovery, again, we like to call it discovery for a reason. We're hearing from you as representatives, people who live in the community, and also representatives of the community. And we'll continue with ongoing engagement this fall. You'll see a number of other information on the project website. And then we'll have another design charrette where we'll advance some of our initial starter ideas during October charrette, and then we'll be working on, again, continued ongoing engagement, and we'll draft the plan and we'll look toward fall and winter and spring of next year. Spring of next year, we'll be developing a final plan. So I want to thank you all for being here and mention again, the project website is listed at the bottom of the slide. It's www.bit.ly/West Arden Arcade. And the question was about, I want to just mention in terms of the record of some of these meetings, I just want to mention this came up in our conversation. We have recorded all of our meetings, and those will be available on the project website as YouTube links. That will be there. Also, this presentation, the actual PowerPoint that we have created for both Monday night and also for Thursday night can be available in PDF format as well. So I appreciate the question, and will say thanks again for being here, and want to ask if Christy would like to say any parting words before we adjourn the meeting.
I just appreciate everyone's time to be part of this conversation. And again, it's early on, so I really look forward to connecting with everybody throughout this process. So I look forward to all that. Thank you again.